it's quiet, or like it doesn't.
Great, thank you very much everyone for coming along today. If you want to grab a bite to eat and take a seat, we're just going to get started. So it's, I suppose introduce myself in the first instance. My name is Orla Power Grant and I'm the Research Funding Officer in the faculty. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our second Knowledge with Impact lecture. So this is a public lecture series that was created by our Assistant Dean for Research, Dr. Elaine Kinsella, with a view to shining a spotlight on the fantastic research taking place within the faculty and also in terms of bringing this work to new audiences. So just to say that we're also recording today's lecture, so a special welcome also to those who are watching back online. So I just want to mention and acknowledge Lynn O'Doherty from the Faculty Office and Sinead Liston for their continued support in organising these lectures and ensuring that everything runs smoothly. So today you're going to have the opportunity to hear from two fantastic early career researchers from the Department of Psychology and the Department of Physical Education and Sports Sciences, both of whom hold prestigious Marie Curie Fellowship grants. But before I introduce you to Elaine and to Jenna, I just want to take a moment to say a little bit about the Marie Curie programme, acknowledge some of the faculty's success in this programme, and also, I suppose, to signpost you to supports that we have for applicants. So if you'll indulge me for a moment for a short advertisement in advance of the main event. So the Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowships, they are, as I said, one of the most prestigious fellowship grants in Europe. They not only facilitate groundbreaking research, but they also play a crucial role in advancing the careers of early career researchers. So through the fellowships, the fellows get the opportunity to not only dive deeper into their particular research field, and you'll hear a lot more about that today, but they also get the opportunity to make a valuable contribution to broader society. So each of the fellows is supported by an academic mentor who supports them in conducting their research, but also who supports their growing independence. And as you can see from the slide, to date EHS has been awarded 11 Marie Curie fellowships. And like anything, it began with small beginnings back in 2016 and we secured 1 award, and this has grown to 4 awards in the 2022 call. So we're developing a growing culture of success within this particular funding programme, and I suppose that's evidenced in our success rates. So we had a 50% success rate in 2021 and an 80% success rate in the 2022 call. So EU funding is a key strategic priority for the university and for the faculty, and we've developed a comprehensive programme of supports to support our applicants in making successful submissions. And this programme of supports runs from March until September, and there's a range of different elements. So it includes a travel bursary that's funded by the faculty, and I suppose this is a mobility-based programme, so the travel bursary allows applicants to visit their mentor during the process of preparing the application. We host information sessions, we host proposal writing workshops, so these are weekly writing workshops over a 2-month period. We have an online virtual learning platform specific to the Marie Curie Fellowships, and we also coordinate internal proposal reviews in advance of submission. So I suppose in designing these supports, we benchmarked our approaches externally, and we believe we have not only designed something that's comprehensive, but also that's quite unique, and that should enhance our ability to attract applicants to this programme in the future. So hopefully after hearing from Elaine and from Jenna today, you will be inspired and motivated to get involved and to explore this funding programme a little further. And if so, if you're an interested supervisor or an intended applicant, then I would urge you to get in touch. I'll be delighted to hear from you. So today, as I said, we will have 2 speakers. Elaine will speak first and then Jenna will deliver her lecture. And I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions and things that you want to ask. So we will have a combined questions and answers session at the end, and that will be moderated by Elaine, our Assistant Dean for Research. So as I said, these are research and training fellowships. So in the process of preparing an application, it's as much built around the research project and the idea as it is about the person and their career and their future ambitions. And I suppose in terms of my role in supporting applicants, I have the privilege of getting to know a little bit about the research project, but also in getting to know the person. So it's a really great honour for me to get to introduce to you today the 2 speakers. So our first speaker is Dr. Elaine Smith. and Elaine is a PhD graduate from the Department of Psychology. So Elaine applied in the 2022 call, and earlier this year she got the great news that she was awarded a global fellowship, and she's working under the mentorship of Professor Orla Muldoon, who's the founding chair of psychology. So Elaine's research focuses on how support for Indigenous rights movements is mobilised among the public through social normative influences prevalent on social media, and she'll tell you a lot more about that. So I suppose Elaine's research as a global fellowship is an international collaboration with Professor Roberto Gonzalez from the Catholic University in Chile. So Elaine will spend 2 years during the outgoing phase of her global fellowship in Chile, and then she will return to UL for the final year of her global fellowship and be based at the Department of Psychology. So I'll pass you over to Elaine.
Thanks, Orla. So hi everyone, thanks for being here. And yes, my name is Elaine. So I'm going to be talking to you about my Marie Curie Global Fellowship, which I will start in March of next year. So the project is called Mobilising Solidarity, and it looks at the role of social media in solidarity-based social movements. So, just again, my fellowship will take place in the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile for 2 years, and I will return to the University of Limerick then for the 3rd year. So the project aims to examine how support for minority rights movements can become mobilised among the general public by focusing on how social norms can be spread through social media. And specifically, we look at the context of Indigenous rights movements. We also aim to examine how different types of messages of solidarity could facilitate different psychological motivations for solidarity-based protests. And we examine how these messages might influence differently the disadvantaged Indigenous groups compared to the advantaged non-Indigenous groups. So Indigenous groups face widespread marginalisation and discrimination worldwide. In Chile, the Mapuche are the largest Indigenous minority group, and they have a long history of conflicts between the Indigenous and the non-Indigenous groups in Chile. In Ireland, travellers face similar levels of disadvantage and discrimination, but protesting or engaging in social movements is less normative in the Irish context than in the Chilean context. So by examining both advantaged and disadvantaged groups in Chile and Ireland, we can increase our knowledge of how to reduce social exclusion of Indigenous groups in society. So in the past decade or two, the social media has been involved increasingly in facilitating social movements. It has been implicated in the Arab Spring, the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movements, among many others. But little is known about whether and how this kind of online participation can truly promote advantaged groups' support of the disadvantaged groups, and what the impact is indeed on the disadvantaged groups themselves. So this kind of low effort online engagement, like signing a petition or joining a issue-based Facebook group, has been criticised as slacktivism, and some research has shown that this kind of online engagement can in fact suppress the motivation to engage in further protests in a movement, as people feel that they have sufficiently supported that movement by engaging in this low-effort behaviour. However, other research has shown that awareness that others also support a cause can increase intentions to engage in a cause oneself. The opinion-based group literature illustrates that in-person discussions can foster identification with an activist movement, and this can in turn increase intentions to promote in-group goals, such as engaging in protests. In this research, these in-person discussions are usually explicitly framed with the goal of reaching an agreement, which isn't the case usually when we share our opinions online. in these online contexts, interactions usually take the form in more simpler discussions or attitude sharing, such as likes and dislikes of a particular short statement. But this information can provide us with some information about what kind of attitudes are normative for advantaged group and disadvantaged groups. Thomas et al. Also outline how perceptions of a shared sense of efficacy of a movement and shared emotions such as anger can foster the emergence of a shared identity, which can then form the basis of a social movement. And this project then examines how messages shared on social media can kind of serve as social norms, which can influence solidarity-based collective action or protest engagement. So, mobilised solidarity will examine two types of normative information from the literature: descriptive norms, which indicate what is commonly done, and injunctive norms, which indicate what people believe should be done or what is approved of. So the kind of messages of solidarity that is often shared online can include these kinds of norms. It can include descriptive norms of action, such as, I will join the protests on the 14th of May. It can include injunctive norms of action. We should all take action to stop discrimination against Indigenous people. Or it could also take the form of injunctive norms of injustice. So we should all be furious about how Indigenous people are treated, for example. So in this research, we will examine the effects of these kinds of normative messages on the common predictors of protests in research, such as identification with the movement, perceived injustice, perceived group efficacy of the movement, and we will compare these effects across disadvantaged and advantaged groups, so Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in this case. So little focus has been given to date on how kind of messages of solidarity can actually impact disadvantaged groups themselves. So the question is, can these kinds of messages actually empower Indigenous groups, or does it have the potential of impeding the movement? We know that having positive contact between advantaged and disadvantaged groups can reduce disadvantaged groups' intentions to engage in protest. Due to facilitating a sense of harmony between these groups, this lowers the intentions to engage in protest for their own rights. However, when an advantaged group explicitly recognises the inequality that the disadvantaged group faces, this can strengthen perceptions of injustice, which can in turn increase engagement in collective action or protests. On the other hand, if the advantaged group is perceived as dominating the movement, this may undermine its efficacy, alienate the disadvantaged group, and reinforce inequalities. Another issue to take into account is the presence of reactionary social movements, which are movements that arise to defend the status quo in the face of progressive social movements. For example, after the Black Lives Matter movement arose, the All Lives Matter movement emerged. And after Me Too came Men Too. So an important question is, can messages of solidarity expressed by an advantaged group potentially inadvertently increase support for reactionary protests? So for advantaged group members, observing messages stating that their group has been discriminating against a disadvantaged group might be seen as a threat to that group's self-image, in particular their need to be seen as a group having moral integrity. And as a response to this perceived threat, they might distance themselves from the movement and deny that that group, disadvantaged group, is in fact disadvantaged. These kind of messages could also threaten the advantaged group's sense of collective ownership, which is a belief that the advantaged are entitled to the country. So we, in this project, we propose that for advantage group members who have high levels of underlying prejudice towards Indigenous groups, when faced with messages of solidarity for Indigenous groups, they may tend towards an increase in reactionary protests. So to summarise then, this research will aim to first examine whether sharing messages of solidarity online can mobilise solidarity-based protests among advantaged non-Indigenous groups, and we will then examine how exposure to these same messages affect Indigenous groups' own willingness for collective action, and we will test the potential for a polarising effect of messages of solidarity on those who are particularly prejudiced towards Indigenous groups. And lastly, we will examine the psychological mechanisms underlying these influences. So these questions will be tested with 3 work packages that I'll just briefly go through, because I'm aware that I'm slightly over time. So the first work package involves a series of interactive online experiments using a kind of fake social media paradigm. So this will test whether observing messages of solidarity promote engagement in solidarity-based protests among non-Indigenous and Indigenous people. Work package 2 will involve a longitudinal panel survey among non-Indigenous people in Chile and Ireland. This will allow us to assess whether changes in perceived norms of solidarity predict changes in willingness to engage in protest. And the third work package will involve a Twitter network study, which will examine whether people who follow Twitter users who support Indigenous people would subsequently increase their support in Indigenous people across time. So this fellowship aims or hopes to expand the psychology of social movements by presenting a novel and comprehensive normative approach to solidarity expressed online. And importantly, by taking into consideration the perspectives of both advantaged and disadvantaged groups, we can better understand the consequences of advantaged groups' involvements in Indigenous rights movements and their true impact on those communities that they aim to support. Knowledge from this research will hopefully assist Indigenous rights movements, organisations in Chile and Ireland in understanding how to frame social media campaigns to better mobilise public support. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Elaine. It's really great to hear. So our next speaker this afternoon is Dr. Jenna Lorusso, and Jenna gained her PhD from the Western University in Canada. So Jenna applied for her Marie Curie Fellowship in the 2021 call, and she was awarded a European Fellowship. Jenna is mentored by Professor Anne MacPhail, who's the Associate Vice President of the Doctoral College, and Jenna is based at the Department of Physical Education and Sports Sciences. So Jenna's project, which she'll tell you a lot more about, focuses on co-creating a preparatory policy engagement programme for quality physical education.
Okay, thanks for that introduction, Orla. And Orla, who I'd like to mention, I'm sure everybody here already knows, is just the most helpful funding officer. I don't think I would have applied for the Marie Curie without your encouragement, and who knows if I would have been awarded without your support to improve the application. So with that said, needs to be said. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having us today. Thanks, Elaine, for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here today to share our presentation called Powering Up Physical Education, Becoming Policy Pioneers Who Shape Tomorrow's Solutions Today. So as Orla mentioned, this work draws on our fellowship work, the PEP for QPE project for short, which stands for Policy Engagement Program for Quality Physical Education, as Orla mentioned, with Professor Anne MacPhail. So the project's around the halfway point. We started in January and will end next December. Because I have 10 minutes with you today, I'm just going to speak about 3 things. So the first is What is the impact that we feel needs to be made? In other words, the rationale or the background to our project. Second, how is knowledge being gathered to make that impact? A bit about the methods of our project. And third, what are the potential impacts that we hope can be made? So starting, what impact is needed and why? I think it's really important to begin with physical education itself. So we know that physical education, when it's provided in a quality form, so by that we mean an active, inclusive, holistic, student-centered educational program that's provided regularly. Quality physical education can have a number of benefits, whether it's reductions in obesity and depression, improved school attendance, enhancement of academic test scores, and for me, most importantly, the development of an active lifestyle that starts early and stretches into adulthood. But despite the recognized power of quality physical education, its potential is not fully realized in schools and universities around the world. A recent UNESCO survey, as an example, recently cited the global decline of quality physical education. So again, there's several reasons for this purported decline, but suboptimal policies and policy configurations have been identified by many, again, including a recent worldwide UNESCO survey, as critical factors. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but we can partially understand this to be that policies influence virtually all physical education realities, whether it's the curriculum content, teacher standards, instructional practices. These are all influenced by policy in some way. So in response to this recognition, a suite of international policy documents developed by the European Commission, the World Health Organization, UNESCO, and a long list of many others we don't have time to name, have outlined this critical need to prioritize attention to and action on physical education policy in order to improve quality provision. And importantly, though, these documents specify that these policy efforts must be the responsibility of all professional stakeholders in physical education. So not just policymakers, but teachers, teacher educators, professional development providers, professional association directors, and so on. Unfortunately, though, policy neglect remains largely normative in physical education, and again, there's many reasons for this. We feel that a very key reason is that preparation for policy engagement is rarely offered in physical education, whether it's initial teacher education, continuing professional development, or postgraduate education. Also, research on what this kind of preparation should even entail has not been conducted in physical education or in other fields. And all of these deficits exist despite the fact that physical education stakeholders, both in my own and others' research, indicate that they do have a desire to engage in policy preparation. The last thing I want to mention about this is that the consequences of lack of policy preparation and ultimately policy neglect are serious. A study of expert opinion has found experts to consider that given threats to the status of physical education in many countries around the world, continued failure to engage adequately with policy may put the future of physical education and its contributions to students' well-being at risk. So that brings me to the aim of the three-phase PEP for QPE project. So I'll explain the sub-phases in a moment. But overarchingly, in this work, we aim to address what we consider to be the significant and urgent need to build physical education stakeholders' capacity, so their interest, their understanding, their motivation to engage in policy efforts such that the provision of quality physical education can be enhanced and those important student outcomes that I mentioned can be achieved. So that brings us to the second part of the presentation. How is knowledge being gathered then to make this impact? The first phase of the project was to identify key facilitators, barriers, and content in the development of physical education stakeholders' policy capacity. This is important, as I mentioned earlier, because we don't really know how to develop policy capacity in physical education or any other field. So we've recently completed this project by asking an international panel of teachers, teacher educators, professional development providers, professional association directors, government education officers, these individuals that have a substantial record of engagement with physical education policy research and or physical education policy practical initiatives. So we asked these individuals, what do they consider to be key in their own and others' development of policy capacity. We did this through an iterative method, the Delphi method, if those are anyone's familiar, where the participants offer their thoughts. I summarize those thoughts, I feed them back to the group, they comment on those thoughts, and we repeat the process. So in this way, there's a level of citizen science, specifically collaborative co-design, in informing what will eventually be the policy, preparatory policy engagement program. To strengthen this phase of the work, we've collaborated across disciplinary lines with Dr. Melody Vixco, who's an education policy scholar at Western University in Canada. The second phase of the work, which is where we are right now, is to translate lived physical education policy experiences into practical lessons. And this is important because even in the broader field of public policy research, there's been little attention to translating complex policy theory and research into accessible information for practitioners. So how are we doing this? Something we learned from the first study is that physical education stakeholders report being able to learn better if they can learn from other physical education stakeholders' stories of their policy work, rather than, for example, just delivering them, here's a list of tips about how to engage effectively in policy work. So drawing on a number of pilot studies that myself and Professor McPhail have conducted together, we developed what we call the policy process case method. Really briefly, this method entails us engaging a small multi-stakeholder group, in this iteration, a teacher, teacher educator, and a government education officer, in a sustained 6-month reflective dialogue where they work to make sense of their lived policy experience by sharing those stories with one another, and with my facilitation relating it to policy theory. I can mention more about that in the discussion if there's interested, but for now I'll just say through this process they not only gather practical lessons learned for themselves, but that learning is captured in a tangible output in the form of cases that they can then share with others, so as a translational research mechanism. To strengthen this co-creation citizen science phase of the work, we've have Dr. John Salzberg on our advisory panel, who you may know is part of the School of Medicine here and heavily involved in the public and patient involvement group. And the final phase of the work entails mobilizing the knowledge that we've generated in phase 1 and 2, as well as from a number of other projects that we have ongoing, into this preparatory policy engagement program for quality physical education, which will be in the form of an open educational resource. So the idea here is that it's an evidence-based, collaboratively developed, internationally applicable resource that can be accessed online by anyone, as well as modified to suit their needs. So although the resource is still in production, blank screen at the moment, we anticipate that the resource will include interactive information about, for example, quite basically, what is policy? That's a big request we get, as well as some physical education, little videos, for example, of physical education policy work stories, and much more. Participants from Project 1, so those individuals I mentioned that have a lot of policy experience, are going to be involved in reviewing and assessing an early draft of the OER, and I'll make changes based on their feedback. So in this way, it involves a level of co-assessment citizen science. We're also studying through case study the strengths, challenges, opportunities, and threats that I encounter as I develop the OER. And the reason that we're doing this is because previous research indicates to us that although many university educators express a desire to create an open educational resource in order to reduce learners' costs, very few actually do. And a key reason that they report for that, a key barrier, is that they lack that level of individual understanding of the process. So we hope that we can contribute in that way. So to strengthen this aspect of the work, we've partnered with Dr. Catherine Cronin, who's the former strategic lead for open education at Ireland's National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning in Higher Education. So that brings us then to the final bit of the presentation. What is the potential impact of this work? Of course, the work is ongoing, so this is hypothetical. But regarding potential scientific impacts, I've already spoken to you today about how we hope to contribute to gaps in the literature. The work is drawing on traditions of interpretive policy research as well as mainstream public policy research. So ultimately, we're contributing to a hybrid practical field of applied policy process research. So that is actually very exciting to be practical in the policy field. I've also described that the project entails a fair bit of citizen science. So there's the hope there that it's developing the potential, the research potential and innovation capacity of those physical education stakeholders who are involved. And finally, the fellowship sees the launch of a new method, the policy process case method, that can be applied really to policy matters in any field, and hopefully that translational research mechanism of the case allows them to increase knowledge transfer within whichever field it is applied. Regarding potential economic impacts, the fellowship's investment in enhancing the in physical education stakeholders' policy capacity for the purposes then of improving quality physical education, UNESCO suggests could contribute to the delivery of cost savings to citizens and governments because they and others like the WHO have deemed investment in quality physical education a low-cost, high-impact action, is their wording, because among other things, they estimate it to reduce the healthcare costs to the tune of approximately 2,500 euros per year per person. Additionally, the fellowship's publication of the preparatory program as an open educational product should allow university physical education programs to take up that call for policy preparation. And hopefully then the financial burden does not need to be placed on students, because we know textbooks can go for 200 to 400 euros each, for example. And then the last point I will make is in terms of potential scientific impacts. And of course, this is where our heart lies as physical educators. The fellowship's contributions to enhancing physical education stakeholders' policy capacity, we really believe will benefit these professionals' daily working lives. And that's not only from the results of our pilot work, but also because we see recent studies by others indicate that physical education stakeholders report that one of the greatest challenges facing their practice is their engagement with policy. So reducing the policy burden on these professionals can allow them to get on with the good business of delivering quality physical education, which, as I alluded to earlier, can enable students to develop those essential physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional skills that they need to become healthy, active, and engaged citizens who UNESCO considers to form the basis of sustainable development in the areas of Goal 3, good health and well-being, and Goal 4, quality education. And I don't have time for this one, but I will just say that's been the whistle-stop tour of the PEP for QPE project. Thanks so much for your attention. Of course, look forward to any questions and comments.
Thank you, Jenna. That was excellent. Thank you, and thank you, Elaine. Two really excellent talks, brilliant speakers. You know, just the exceptional capabilities of two early career researchers in our faculty. It's really lovely to hear from you both today. It's lovely to have this opportunity to really highlight the excellent work you're doing.